It's an age-old question. Why are museums so intimidating? Could it be the size, shape, and designs of the buildings that come from a long time ago? Or is it the art that is actually intimidating? Is it the people who man and work at the museums who perhaps make it hard for ordinary people to approach these spaces? Well, this afternoon at 1:30, the Goethe-Institut Museal episode will host a public discussion which will look at ways to decolonize and democratize museums. The discussion will bring museum directors, curators, and professionals in related fields from several countries to put this issue and others that may relate to it and affect it under the spotlight. One of the very active coordinators of this project is independent curator, arts lecturer, and co-founder of the Center for Historical Reenactments, Gabi Ngcobo, who joins us live in studio. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning.
Let's talk about colonization in this context that I've just discussed in the intro. I mean, what exactly is it? How are museums colonized?
I think it's because museums came into different societies, especially outside of the West, through the process of colonization. Therefore, they are part and parcel of the project of colonization. And it is where the colonizer wanted to display their culture in the colonies so that they can reflect perhaps their superiority as well. And in this context, it is important that we understand them in that way.
Yeah. Why, though, in your opinion, has the industry not made an effort to change the status quo?
I think there has been effort and dialogues, but I mean, of course, if we have to change the status quo as well, then maybe we have to change the architecture. And you did speak about the architecture, and these architectures can be intimidating.
Yeah.
They do look like courtrooms.
Yeah, true.
And that can be intimidating for a lot of people who museum cultures is not part of their daily life. So one has to imagine what would a future museum look like in the space, and what would it display as well.
And democratizing, what are we talking about in this context, democratizing museums?
So making museums user-friendly, by engaging public in ways that reflect what people also see outside their windows, rather than as spaces of imagining worlds that are not perhaps part of us. Yes.
Now, whose job or responsibility is it to transform and change the way things are at the moment?
Well, I think it would be society's job, but of course there are professionals who have studied, and sometimes they come through different fields to work in museums, and those would be museum directors, but curators as well, whose role is growing more and more in terms of kind of who speaks for collections in museums, but also interacting with artists and especially the public, so-called audiences as well.
You touched a little bit on this earlier, that efforts have been made to sort of change the status quo. Give us a real example of where this, the status quo has changed and we can see the change.
I don't know if I can do that, but I do know that there are a lot of discussions and critical discussions and people intervening, and this has not been the case in previous years. So there's voices, young voices that are really challenging museums to think about their programs, to think about their educational programs, but also to think about issues of representation, who's speaking for whom, and how they speak for others.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, is a crucial question.
Let's talk about the discussion this afternoon. Who's going to be part of this discussion?
So I will introduce the Museal episodes as a whole, as we started in Brazil, in Salvador, to Bolivia, and now in South Africa. And we have three panelists. Natalie Mulov from Peru, Lima,
Right.
who's a museum director in Lima. We have Matthias Mulhe, who is a director of a museum in Munich. And then we have Marina Fotkis, who is the head of the Documenta 14 in Athens. So we have those three panelists and a moderator from Brazil.
Yeah, who do you hope also shows up for this discussion and is critical to this discussion?
I hope a lot of young people can show up. I hope a lot of students who are interested in these questions of museums and representation. And I do hope that, of course, that the general public, people who come from other disciplines, may it music, may it theater or literature, because I think it's important that these voices can come together somehow to weave these narratives that we try to stage in museum settings.
All right, Gabi, thank you so much for talking to us. You're going to come back a little later to speak about your new role, so we're going to ask you to stay. Gabi Ngcobo is speaking to us about the public talk that will take place this afternoon at 1:30 at the Parkwood-based Goethe-Institut. The discussion will look at ways to decolonize and democratize museums. The Museal episode will hear the voices of museum directors, curators, and other industry professionals to take the issue further. More details are on the website.